Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ethex Cuppa Club number 24. We've done a lot of these now. Today, I'm really pleased to be joined by Charge My Street and Energy Garden, a couple of organisations that are currently listed on Ethex doing crowdfunding raises. My name's Josh Brewer, I'm Senior Business Development Manager here at Ethex. I'll be sort of moderating the discussion today. And we'll be chatting to Daniel Heery from Charge My Street. Hi, Daniel.
Hi there.
So Charge My Street have launched, it's their second investment raise with Ethex. The idea behind it is to give more people access to on-street community-owned electric vehicle charging. Through that, tackling the problem of a lack of EV charging points in residential areas, particularly those without driveways. So this is basically helping more people to choose EVs, creating a positive effect on society and the planet. And Daniel and I will be joined by Martin Cedric from Community Benefit Society Energy Garden. They're doing a raise through Ethex to fund a new community-owned solar installation on Streatham train depot. Not only will this installation generate clean green energy, where there are surpluses, they'll go towards creating and maintaining green spaces on London's transport network. So before we get going today, just a little bit of housekeeping for everyone. The aim of this session is to learn more about Charge My Street and Energy Garden, particularly the positive impact that they're making. It's important to say that this isn't a financial promotion. We can't answer any questions about individual financial circumstances on this. As you can see, we've got a chat function here. If you could please, if any questions you've got, just drop them into there. What I'll try and do is I'll try and work those into the conversations. But if we don't get a chance to pick them up during the course of the webinar, at the end of it, we should be able to just run through any questions that are still outstanding. If there isn't time to answer all the questions, then we will do follow-ups on those as well. And just to let everyone know that we're recording the session. We'll be uploading it to our YouTube channel and website as well, so you can watch it or share it. We'll also post these up on the individual profiles for the businesses. And then the session should be no longer than 45 minutes. So on that note, let's get started. I think it'd be useful probably just to get overviews from both of you on your organisations and the work that you do. Daniel, could I start with you, please?
Yes, certainly. Thanks, Josh. My name's Daniel Heery. I'm a director of Charge My Street. We're a community benefit society based in Lancaster and Cumbria, and we aim to get charge points within 5 minutes walk of every house. And we know that a lot of the initial homes that have got EVs have actually got driveways, and they run a cable from their house to charge up their electric car overnight, which is great. But when I started off on this journey back in 2016, I live in a terraced house, and so that option just wasn't open to me. And it was the same time that Donald Trump was pulling out Paris climate agreements, and it felt like quite a depressing time for the global environment. But I thought, look, I'm not just going to sit by and let all this happen. I'm actually going to go out and do something about it. And so if I want to have an EV, I can't rely on the local authority or BP or Shell or these big energy companies to do it. It's all about what can I do, working with my neighbours and my friends to build some sort of organisation that can put these charge points in. In a previous life, we've done a lot of work on community broadband, and worked a lot with community buildings and local authorities to get broadband into places that were really quite difficult to reach. So we said, let's use the same sort of methodology rather than try and put charge points on streets and have to deal with the local authorities. Let's put charge points on community centres, local pubs, local shops, places where we already had good connections with the people who own who own the car parks, and just go in and try and retrofit that infrastructure, but using our existing social capital and social connections, because it's a lot easier than trying to persuade a local authority that they've got to do something. And from that, we've really built up the society. So now we have about 80 charging sockets in. Hopefully by the end of the spring next year, we'll have around about 130 charge points in, across the northwest, but also down south in Wiltshire. There's going to be one outside Bath, Oxfordshire, and then also some in Essex as well. So the key thing for us is we've solved the problem for ourselves, but we recognise that there's loads more people who are in exactly the same position. You know, about 40% of homes don't have a driveway. They could be flats, they could be in terraces, they could even be rented accommodation. So our solution really resonates with those people. But in order to expand it, we need to get the financing to pay for the charge points to go in, so that it doesn't cost the host organisation anything to have the charge point put in. But then we take revenue from the charging sessions that take place. So we buy the electricity and then we put a margin on top of that, and that's what helps to repay the initial investment and pays for all the ongoing running costs. And I think what makes us, I suppose, to go back to what Josh said, when we were the first EV charge point sort of share offer to go live on Ethex a couple of years ago. Since then, there's been other ones that have come along, and it's really great to see more EV charge point networks are looking at this sort of way of raising finance. But I suppose what makes us really special is that we're focused on connecting everyone to this revolution, and we're going out and connecting the really hard places. So you'll see some of the pictures that are going past behind me were on housing estates that are really quite rough, but we think they should have a chance to get an EV just as much as anyone else. And we're also in some quite remote rural villages as well, because we think, you know, when tourists go there, they want to charge up, so we can make some money out of that. But they have houses that don't have driveways too. Not that many, but there's still a business case for it. And we're really pleased by the performance of some of these charge points, like this one behind me in Dent, and the one behind me there. So really focused on that. And people who don't have smartphones, you know, we have them who they phone us up to start the charge on our charge points. So it's about being really inclusive and taking those people with us. So our impact is saying, okay, we want to get this, we want to try and reduce carbon savings. That's the big thing. You know, we can really do a hatchet job on people's carbon emissions if they switch to an EV. But it's also about e-bikes as well. We've got e-bike chargers, as one of the pictures has got the one in Penrith that we put in. Also about car clubs and how we get electric car clubs going around our charge points, and we have partnerships there. And also how we get solar panels on these sites, and how we use renewable energy as much as we can for our charge points. And this has a really sort of positive circular effect, because when we engage with community buildings on this, and pubs and businesses, we upsell all those other great sustainability things like the car clubs. You know, can they get one of them in? Can you get some solar panels on your roof? This is all really important, and that's why we really need your investment, because we want to see this grow. We've got a huge pipeline of sites coming up for 2022, but we can only build those if we actually have more money coming into these investments. The great thing for you is that, you know, you get a 30% EIS tax break on it as well. So really important that you help us to try and support that vision and get it out there far more in 2022, because it's going to be a huge year for EV charge point installation. And we want people like us who've got great ethics, you know, democratic ownership doing it, as opposed to some of those big fossil fuel companies who've got a bit more of a bit more dubious reputation when it comes to energy for vehicles. Okay, that's all from me. Hand back to Josh now.
Thanks, Daniel. I think a bit of a dubious reputation is understatement of the year when you're talking about Shell and BP and fossil fuels. But
their lawyers might be watching, so I've got to be careful.
Fair enough.
I've got my Cuppa now as well.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's exactly that. It's this community aspect of it, and it's this being delivering impact in a range of different ways. And I think that's the beauty of, you know, both yourselves and Energy Garden as well, that you're looking at. It's a full spectrum of things that you're doing. It's not just putting in a piece of equipment and then generating revenues out of that. There's so much more that sits around that, which is fantastic. Martin, if we could go across to you, if you could just give us a run through of Energy Garden, what it is that you guys do.
Sure, thanks Josh. I've got some slides to share, so I don't have a sort of a swanky background, I'm afraid. So but if I can just share my screen, hopefully you guys can see this okay.
Yep, that's good.
Yeah. So I'm Martin Cedric. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Energy Garden, and we are a 100% community-led organisation. We're a registered community benefit society, and so delighted to be here today with Ethex and Charge My Street as well, to talk a bit more about what we do and the share offer that we have through Ethex. So what we do is we work with local community groups and local volunteers to do a couple of sort of key kind of types of projects, really. So one is the development of community-owned renewable energy and the solar projects, and we can talk a bit more about those. But then the other aspect is the community gardens, or energy gardens as we like to call them. So we have our network of gardens across London Overground. We've got about 28 gardens now. And that's really important for us, because it's not just about the climate change and reducing emissions side of things. Daniel mentioned about the inclusiveness as well. So this is really important, because we have other social issues that we need to address, other environmental issues that we need to address, such as biodiversity and air quality, and on the social side. Not everyone's got the same sort of opportunities, right? So not everyone has the same sort of access to green spaces or access to education and employment opportunities. So the gardens are a really important sort of focal point, really, to bring people together, to allow them to sort of get their hands dirty, quite literally, in sort of developing and designing and maintaining those gardens, but also to then support the other sort of education and awareness type initiatives that we have, such as our youth training programs, our schools, sort of workshops that we run, teaching people about issues around biodiversity, issues around climate change, and so on. So as I say, the gardens are a really important point there. And as we like to say, it's sort of educating from seed to solar to society. So the seed part obviously being the gardens piece, the solar being the renewable energy projects that we then deliver, and then the revenues from all of that then sort of feed back into supporting the gardens and supporting our other programs. So it's quite a nice kind of virtuous circle, rather, to take us through that. Moving on to the next slide, if I can figure that out. So this is the basic sort of financial model. So as a community benefit society, it operates on a kind of one member, one vote principle. So whether you've got one share or 1,000 shares, everyone's got the same say in terms of what we then do as a society. We use that investment to support the development of the renewable energy projects, and then the revenues from those projects, as I say, is then sort of feeding back into supporting those those kind of programs that I talked about, to give a reasonable return to our investors, and obviously to support the funding and the admin and the operational sort of costs for the projects themselves. So that's the basic sort of financial model, but it's not just about the sale of energy. We've also included what we call a social premium. So this is an additional price per kilowatt hour that's charged on the sale of the energy. So that's what Patagonia are going to be paying, as well as getting their energy from us. They're also paying this additional social premium, and that just sort of increases the returns that are then sort of feeding back into the into the community, into the project. So these are just some of our partners. With GTR, we're working on the first community-owned renewable energy project on UK rail infrastructure. Patagonia being the business energy user, as I've mentioned. Unity is the sort of the supplier in there, so that's a joint venture between Co-op and Octopus Energy. So they sort of facilitate the sale of energy to Patagonia. But we've got many other partners as well, such as Network Rail, of course, the NHS, working with Bank of America. So lots of organisations are increasingly looking at Energy Garden and what we do as a way of supporting their sort of broader commitments to improving sort of environmental and social outcomes. So that's the basic model. And then final couple of quick slides. So this is our sort of stress and project. So this is the first of a number of projects that we're looking to deliver. So this is our first share offer through Ethex. But once we've completed this project, then a lot of the basic sort of agreements and so on can then be reused. And we've got sort of a pipeline of sites that we're looking at deploying in 2022 and beyond. But for one project, just using this as an example, it's around about sort of 200 plus megawatt hours of generation per year. That equates to, as you can see, sort of 44 tons of CO2. And the lifetime impacts of just this one project is kind of equivalent to the annual supplying almost 1,000 UK homes for 1 year, or taking 500 cars off the road for 1 year. So as we do more and more of these projects, obviously those sorts of benefits will scale. So, so that's the core project benefits in sort of more energy and carbon terms. And then the share offer itself. So our target raise was 160k. I'm delighted to say we've actually already met and exceeded that target, which is great news, because it just means that we can accelerate our program of delivery into the new year. We've still got about sort of 5 days or so to go on that, so there's still time to sort of invest. And as you can see, the details here, sort of minimum investment of £50, maximum of quite a chunky 40,000. But we're looking at a sort of 4% annual interest payment with a sort of a fairly equivalent sort of contribution back into Energy Garden as well. They're non-transferable shares, but they can be withdrawn, but just not for the first sort of 3 years. So it is a longer term investment. We encourage people to invest for the longer term, but some of the headline facts there, and you can see more details obviously via the Ethex platform. So that's it from me, and back over to Josh.
Thanks, Martin. I think what comes through on just looking at both of your projects actually is that these, the intention behind them is for them to be ongoing and replicable and continue to rolling out. So, sometimes we work with organizations, it might be a really great project, but it's only ever going to be a one-off. But with both of you, you're looking at pipelines, you're looking at continuing to make this a rolling kind of set of projects. And I think that's, the potential for that to deliver significant impact is fantastic, basically. It's one of the things that sort of, it's interesting because there's a contrast between your two organisations in some ways. Charge My Street, I think you're mostly based in the Northwest. A lot of that is rural. Energy Garden, very much based in London, obviously highly urban, a lot of it. But both in your own way, you're quite highly localised in the way in which you operate and which way you deliver projects. I guess it'd just be interesting to understand why that's important to you, why you've gone down that particular route. And Daniel, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, I think it's, when you're starting off a new social enterprise, it's really important to get everything, all your systems in place, get everything worked out, make your mistakes early. And it's a lot easier making your mistakes close to home than it is on the other end of the country. So we wanted to really get the business model working, develop a bit of scale in the local area where we're working with communities that we know, we understand how our technology can be used there. We've got directors who are drawn from across the area that we're working in, so we have a good bit of local knowledge, and it also means that we can use the same sorts of contractors and the same sorts of supply chains that we're confident with. And then I think as a key thing that we recognise though is that a lot of organisations across the country are really grappling with the same sorts of challenges that we've got. So community energy organisations in south of England have got exactly the same challenges as some of the ones we work with in the Northwest. So it's always been the vision to say, okay, we can solve the problem for ourselves, but we want to try and support other people to do that as well, and to try and build that into some sort of commercial model which recognises the investment that we've made in setting the thing up, but also potentially makes it easier for other people to sort of follow in our footsteps and to get more of that, to get more of these charge points in the ground, because we've got a huge amount of work to do if we're going to meet this target for 2030 for phasing out all petrol and diesel cars.
Okay, thanks. And I've just had a question come in actually. How predictable or variable are the costs of installing charging points in different locations, in those different locations you're working on? Is it, is it roughly similar, or does each one have its own particular challenges and costs related to that?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately we work closely with site hosts, and this is a retro. It's largely sort of retrofit. We're not going into greenfield sites and building new charging parks. So when we deal with a group, an organisation like a village hall or a parish council, they they may start off being really keen on it, but when it gets down to the detail of where's the charge point going to go, they might say we want it on this side of the car park, but we don't want it on that side of the car park. But the difference between those two locations could add up to several thousands of pounds, because there's more cabling to be put in, more things to be dug up. And as soon as you start digging up concrete and tarmac, there's all sorts of things that you find. So the great thing over the last 2 years, we've been working on an Innovate UK project, which has enabled us to work with a number of different site hosts, a number of different locations and situations and technologies. And what we have now is a highly sort of productized version of saying, okay, this is what we'll do. This is what we can comfortably estimate the cost at for any new site. And if there's a variation from that, then we immediately know that it's going to be difficult, and we can try and pass some of that risk or those extra costs back onto the site host. So it's like saying, if you want it at the far end of the car park, which is going to cost an extra £5,000, then that's something that you can project manage and you can pay for. Quite often that can be really good, because say a parish council will know a local groundworks contractor who can come in and do that work for them, as opposed to us having to bring someone from outside the village to do that work. So it has advantages in terms of being able to reduce the cost, but from our point of view, it's able to reduce some of those risks down and make those costs more predictable, which improves the workflow. It makes everything faster, means we can get more sockets in, and makes it cheaper as well for everyone.
Great, thanks. And I guess, so Martin, turning to you, and I think this still is relating into this question about locality. But so just had a question asking you to just spell out who's buying the energy from the project, and then how far community groups are involved in identifying sites for the energy gardens.
Sure. So in terms of who buys the energy, so we have a combination of the on-site consumption and the energy export. So for the Straddon project, for example, it's going to be GTR who will be buying some of the energy to cover their on-site usage. As we move into subsequent sort of projects, then that will depend on where the asset is located. So for example, if we're working with the NHS, then the NHS would be the buyer of the on-site energy. And then whatever isn't used on-site and then needs to be exported, that's where we have a power purchase agreement with a business energy user. So Patagonia, in the case of the Straddon project, this is where other partners like Bank of America come into play when we look at some of our other projects going forward. So we have a power purchase agreement to sell the exported energy. So there we actually have two power purchase agreements: one for the on-site consumption, one for the energy export. It's better to have sites with a higher level of on-site consumption, because when you start to export to the grid, then you have other sort of costs start to come into play there. So, but that's basically how the sale of energy side of things works. Actually, worth noting with the Straddon project, where Patagonia don't necessarily need to use all of the exported energy, then the residual will feed into the co-op's domestic community energy sort of tariff as well. So as if you're on that tariff, then you get to get some of the energy from our projects and other community energy projects as well, which is quite a nice sort of feature, really. In terms of the energy gardens and the level of community engagement there, so we have a sort of 16-step process for the creation of new energy gardens. Part of that is people can nominate a station or a location where they might want to have a garden. There are sort of various considerations such as how much space is there kind of water access and so on and so forth. So not every space is necessarily appropriate, but if you are interested in sort of having a garden near you or at a station near you, then you can go to our website. You can email us at info@energygarden.org.uk, and you can sort of make those suggestions, and we'll sort of bake that into our process, really. If I may, this just touches briefly on why London and why we're working in these sorts of urban environments, and I think that particularly heightens the issues around the misalignment really between society and nature, and the fact that living in cities, people don't have access to green spaces. We're not necessarily aware of the climate issues in the way that we should be. So that's one of the reasons why we are in London. If we can kind of crack this in an environment like that, then the expansion of that idea becomes significantly easier as we move to other sort of less complex locations. But a really important thing to have these energy gardens in very visible areas where on the overground you get a lot of sort of commuters coming through. They see the work that we're doing, they get involved and so on. So but yes, by all means, the community can nominate their gardens.
Yeah. And I think you've got something similar, haven't you, Daniel, that people, you're open to people approaching you and saying, what do we need to do in order to get a charging point in our neighbourhood? Are there any sort of like key criteria for both of you? So I'll start with you, Daniel, but then also to you, Martin. What's the key criteria that's going to move you closer to being able to do that successfully? Put that that proposal successfully.
Yeah, we've got a page on our website where people can go and suggest sites for charge points. And the rationale behind this is that we know that a number of sites are unsuitable. It's probably about 1 in 30 sites that get suggested actually makes it all the way through the process. So we get people to drop a pin on a Google map which shows exactly where the charge point's going to go. And then we ask them a set of questions to see if they meet our gateway criteria. I think the key one for us is having a really good power supply into the building, so 3-phase power, because technical considerations are really, really quite important. If it's got really good power, then we can sort out some of the other things. But generally, I suppose that's the main technical consideration. The other main consideration that we look for from organisations that host our charge points is their alignment with what Charge My Street is trying to do. So I suppose our ethics and our objectives, because we find that if we're working with a site that really gets us, then things move through a lot quicker. Leases get signed. It's easy to agree locations, and it happens faster. If we work with a site owner who doesn't particularly think what we're doing is that good, they maybe have very high expectations about profits they're going to make from any charge point on their land. They don't really understand any of it. Then things just take a lot longer. Getting things signed off, it's hard work dealing with them, and there's also a really high risk that, having put quite a bit of time into developing a site and drawing up plans and explaining everything, they turn around at the last minute and say, we had a talk at the committee meeting last night and we've decided we don't want to go ahead, which for us is really frustrating because we spent a lot of time on it and that time could have been spent somewhere else. So the key thing for us is how aligned are they with what we're trying to do, but also the technical side. Have they got a 3-phase electric supply?
Thanks, Daniel. And then, sorry, Martin, is there sort of like, I can see that you're just putting a big response into the chat there on one of the questions. There's sort of key criteria that, that we're just going to, that have to be in place in order for you to be looked to install an energy garden?
Sure. So I think it's worth looking at both the renewable energy project projects, the solar projects and the energy gardens, as part and parcel of the same overall picture, really. And it's a bit of a sort of Venn diagram. So the optimal scenario for us would be to have somewhere where you can have the solar energy system, but then also the sort of gardens in that location as well. So that's where sites like the NHS, for example, provide more of a possibility to get both of those things happening in the same location. You've got the large roof area of the hospital, but then also the gardens kind of space there as well. When we look at the energy gardens on the overground, then they're not necessarily somewhere where you could have a large asset as well. So this is where we've got the solar energy project on the Streatham train care depot with a sort of massive roof and so on, and a good sort of system size there. But then the energy gardens themselves can be smaller gardens on sort of smaller stations, and maybe they're more just kind of planters rather than sort of large kind of green spaces. But then if anyone's sort of familiar with the overground or some of these kind of rail stations, you can get these really sort of under-maintained kind of redundant kind of areas, really, that it's just kind of growing completely wild, and that creates quite a big space where we can be sort of planting various kind of crops. We have a sort of harvest party at the end of the year, and we kind of make food and bring everyone together from the things that we've grown. We've also got energy garden pale ale that we can make from the hops that we grow on some of our stations. So it's a sort of an it depends type situation. We can have a smaller garden or a larger garden, but is it in a good space where there's the potential to expand and do something something sort of fairly significant there. So we're trying to sort of move towards having bigger, more impactful gardens ideally, but it's a range of stuff, because we want to be engaging across London, so every garden's got its role to play, if that answers the question.
I think it does. I think it very much does. And I think, what comes through is that, with both of these, your organisations, that there is this ongoing communication with people in those areas. It's talking with them. It's developing, as you say, developing relationships and partnerships, I suppose. And I guess just to sort of develop that partnership idea. I mean, I think neither of you operate in a void. You're not going in there and just doing this all yourself. You're working with other organisations, and maybe it'd be just a little bit useful just to understand a bit more about what those partnerships look like for you guys. So Daniel, if I start with you, presumably in order to get a charge point in, there's quite a consortium of various players that are involved in that, aren't there?
Yeah, so we work closely with some local authorities in the Northwest. So at the moment, we're working with Lancaster City Council. We've installed charge points for them on some of their fleet vehicles. So the fleet charges during the day, residents charge at night on the same charge point. Also, we're working with Carlisle City Council and South Lakeland District Council charge points on their car park. So we have leases in place for those for the next 10 years. And that's one of the models that we really like to promote, because it enables them to get a tick in the box and show they're putting the charge points in and they're doing something for the climate emergencies. It also enables us to get those to start delivering a service for their residents. Because one thing we found working with local authorities is that there's often a number of different internal stakeholders, and it can be really difficult for them all to agree on what best way forward is on something quite novel like EV charge points. And particularly in the north of England, where you have local authorities that are probably relatively small, where you've got district councils and county councils still, they just don't have the strength and depth in terms of teams to be able to engage with this issue. So part of our job is to make things as simple as possible for them so that we can get the charge points installed on their land. And the big thing for me is, when we started off, we thought, okay, how can we avoid working with local authorities, because it's a pain. In fact, they own so much of the public realm, or they control so much of it. You've got to find ways to be able to engage with them and work in partnership. And one of the great strengths that we've got at Charge My Street is the team have come out of other projects where we've worked closely with those local authorities for the past 20 years. So we have a sense of how they operate, what the culture is, how people tick, which makes it easier to sort of maneuver a way through that sort of maze. Very difficult, very challenging, but it's got to be done. And if we don't do it, then no one else will, and we won't get this really vital infrastructure in place.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? It's because there is so much effort involved in it that you have to be focused on the impact. You're not going to do it just from a purely business perspective. Again, it's the beauty of community-based organisations, community-owned organisations doing this type of work. And I suppose, Martin, just to go over to you on that. I mean, I think one of the really interesting things about Energy Garden is that the partnerships that you're developing with some of your off-takers. So there's the partnership with Patagonia, you mentioned also Bank of America. You know, these are huge companies, but it's interesting that they are now seeing it as part of the way, you know, part of their license to operate almost is that they're working with organizations such as yourself.
Absolutely, and I think the landscape has really changed in that regard. So I guess a little bit more of a sort of personal backstory. I spent 15 years or so of my career working in investment banking with the likes of HSBC and JP Morgan and so on. So I sort of came across to sustainability a bit further down the line, and then spent sort of 6 years in sustainability consulting. And so when I started out in sustainability consulting, organizations, I think generally speaking, they weren't really properly engaging with this issue. They had some compliance reporting requirements and so on and so forth, but acting on both the climate change question and the broader sort of social questions wasn't really part of their DNA. It wasn't a core strategic priority. And I think over the last sort of 2 or 3 years, that has absolutely begun to change. So rather than just sort of doing the compliance hygiene piece, increasingly I was working with the leadership teams of leading FTSE 100 companies and so on, where they were moving their business quite concertedly towards being a net zero organization, over a longer term time frame, but you can't make that sort of transition overnight. So the fact that we have the likes of Patagonia, who have sort of been leading by example for many years, and other organizations recognizing that it can't just all be about the financial side of things, it creates more of a sort of more of an appetite, more of a willingness, more of a recognition to fund something like a project that will still deliver the financial return for sure, but it also starts to tackle these other sort of environmental and social issues. And I think the COVID pandemic has really brought that sort of social inequity piece into the spotlight as well. So I think the timing is absolutely right for these kinds of initiatives, and we are, off the back of leaders like Patagonia and so on, we're seeing more and more sort of corporates with kind of interest in not just buying kind of renewable energy, but buying community-owned renewable energy as well.
Yeah, thanks. And I think it's interesting. A lot of what's being framed, I think, we're talking about transition to a low carbon economy, a sustainable economy. And I think a lot of what's being discussed at kind of the community level is, how can that transition be just? How is it equitable? How is it that everyone is involved in that, and that people aren't left behind? And my sense is that both of your organisations are working to do that. But Daniel, it'd be useful to hear a little bit more how you see the work that you do trying to deliver that just transition.
Yeah, at the start of this year, we've not really given a great deal of thought to accessibility of our charge points for people with disabilities. And we were contacted by one of the local authority council officers who'd been out and seen one of the early charge points we put in and come back with a number of observations. And that started us on a journey where we've gone out and worked with an accessibility consultant who drives an electric vehicle. And he's been out and done assessments on a number of our charge points on the app, the mobile phone app that people use to start their charge sessions. And it's been really revealing about what we have to do to design in accessibility and make sure that this infrastructure, which we're installing, is going to be there for the next 15, 20 years, is actually available to everyone. Because at the start of the year, it was very much focused on this is what it's got to look like technically to be compliant. Now it's far more about how this fits in, and it goes broader than that. It's like how how women feel using the charge point at night. If the area is poorly lit, it means where the charge points are located. So like this one behind me, it's in an area where you have people who may not be buying their own EV, but may be they may drive an electric taxi in the next year, or they may be driving an electric Amazon delivery van, which they need to charge up overnight at home. And so they need to have access to this sort of infrastructure as much as the Tesla driver who maybe lives in, maybe visits the area. So it's really about how do we come up with a commercial model and strategy which encompasses the needs of all those different people, so that we have this just transition and we don't leave anyone behind.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. And then Martin, I mean, I know that Energy Garden does a range of things. I mean, you're involved in quite a few training programs as well, and maybe it'd be useful just hear a little bit about that and how that contributes towards this idea of making it more equitable, the transition.
For sure, and I guess again from a sort of personal standpoint, I started out looking primarily at the climate change kind of issue, but actually the more you start to look at it, then the climate issues that we have and the social issues that we face, they all start to become part and parcel of the same kind of broader kind of problem, really. So to touch on the youth training piece that we do, we've had 62 individuals sort of go through our youth training program. They get an AQA qualification and accreditation at the end of that. We've engaged with over sort of 2,000 school children to run sort of classes and workshops and so on, looking at things like biodiversity, looking at things like renewable energy, and we run things like solar panel making workshops and so on. So by starting to engage with people within the community on these sorts of issues, not just young people, but kind of adults as well, I think that awareness raising, particularly in an urban environment where vegetables grow in supermarkets and your energy just sort of comes through and you pay a bill, by direct debit sort of thing. So people aren't really connected to these sorts of things. So that's a really key part of what we do. And through this training, through these accreditations and so on, we give people the opportunity to then go on and get either sort of access to further education or sort of employment opportunities where they can start to have a role to play in the new sort of green economy that we will need to have going forward. So that's within our DNA at Energy Garden. It's not just about deploying community-owned renewables and supporting that transition. We have to have the empowerment and the enablement and the sort of building the cohesive and resilient communities as part of it, for sure.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, and I think I think it'd be useful just to finish. I'm conscious of time. We're just about running out here. I think we could run on with this conversation, but maybe just to finish off, if just give very briefly, what's your vision of the future? What do we need to look like in 2050? Daniel, I'll pass that across to you.
Yeah, for me, it's about how do we make this electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which is being installed now and will be increasingly, how do we make that democratically owned and accountable to local communities, with profits being reinvested back in those communities? We have the building blocks here now with Charge My Street to deliver that, but we can't scale it up without the investment that we get from the great people who support us through the Ethex share offers and everything else. So we have a really great opportunity now to shape the future and deliver something really different in terms of the way we electrify the transport network over the next 30 years.
And Martin, thank you, Daniel, and Martin, if I go across to you.
Sure, thanks, Josh. So it's quite a big question to finish on, perhaps, but I don't think we're in any doubt that we need to be in a very different place by 2050, and we've got an opportunity to do things in a different way. Historically, the sort of profit motive has always been the main one. We're not going to move away from being a fossil fuel economy and the economy that we've got into one single solution overnight. We need lots of different sort of initiatives and ideas to start to augment and improve the system overall. So we need sort of community investment in projects like Charge My Street, like Energy Garden, and many others to enable these things to happen. And the model is there, that they are viable models, and the more kind of attention, the more sort of interest they get, they start to become even more viable, because people start to recognize that the returns that you get from these projects start to really multiply. You're not just getting renewable energy, but you're getting a kind of greener and more vibrant kind of overground infrastructure. You're getting more kind of engaged communities with more opportunity as well. So that's fundamentally the transition that we need to make. We need to shift from it just being about the money to recognizing the value and the inherent economic value of some of these other social and environmental outcomes.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that's what comes through really strongly talking to both of you guys is that. And more broadly with a lot of the organisations we have on Ethex, actually, it's that community ownership is absolutely fundamental. That that creating financial and social value within the community, and then retaining that in the community as well. It's not extracted out by a big company. It stays in there. It cycles. You create a circular economy and based on community ownership. And yeah, I think that's a future that we could all get on board with. Listen, I'm conscious but thank you so much, guys. I'm conscious of time. We've come to the end of the session there. What I'd like to say, thank you to everyone for joining us today. There's a couple more days left for both of these offers on the platform. So Energy Garden running to the 22nd, and I think Daniel, I think Charge My Street is going to the 31st. Is that right? Yeah. So I'd really encourage people to come and take a look at the platform, read the documents, really understand what these businesses are about and the impact they create, and then then hopefully feel that you'd like to invest into that. So yeah, just finish off. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Daniel. It's been a pleasure. Thank you to everyone who's joined us. Thank you for everyone who's joined all of these webinars across the year. I can't believe we've got to the end of 2021. But so everyone have a good Christmas break, and then I look forward to catching up again in the new year. So cheers, guys.
Thanks very much. Cheers, Josh.
Thanks,
Cheers,
Josh.
Daniel. Thanks, everyone. Thanks.